to 50% of your fractures produce 80% of your hydrocarbons.
That lends a lot of credibility. If you come in and can be upfront and honest and say, actually in this application, I think this product over here that I don't represent would be better for you. That all of a sudden now you become a trusted advisor rather than a salesman.
And I often say that we have all the requirements of space, right? Because it has to go underground and send us data from miles and miles away, and it has to work. Like, failure is not an option.
We'll put on, a standard mule shoe. Ours is slightly different just for that, but it's, everybody's got one.
The top drive and the drawworks really don't care whether the electrons coming at it are from a joystick or a PLC.
The panel, what you see here on the left, which is now controlled by one of my students, is showing you actually the control of our brakes.
As of now, geothermal is a pretty small market.
If you have tortuosity, the casing will be up against the side on part of the well. There won't be any cement there. The cement will have crescent around it.
So managed pressure drilling, it's been defined as a process to precisely control the pressure profile in the wellbore.
The key is being transparent with our clients in this case. So tell them what happened. If we had a failure, tell them exactly what happened. Whether it's our fault, whether it's whatever the issue was, we need to be transparent.
But I think it's very important for everyone in the industry to know what's out there and kind of what's happening downhole as well.
I've probably worked on over 40 different performance limiters in my career. If I miss any of those and the computer is raising weight on bit and I miss any of those, I have a train wreck. Computer's going in the ocean.
Here's your new colors, here's your new thing. We don't do that at all.
Here's the tattoo you need to get.
Yeah, here's the tattoo. Sorry about the last one. We used to fake that all the time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Vidor Locksmith Show, where we are unlocking the secrets to success in the oil and gas industry, one interview and presentation at a time. I'm your host, David Gibson, and I am super excited to be here with you guys this week. This interview is something I have been looking forward to for a long time because it is really outside of my domain of expertise. We all know that there's so many different elements to the oil and gas industry, and we can't be experts at all of them. Right? You know drilling, you know bits, you know motors, you know MWD, you know fracking, you know EOR, you know petrophysics, geology. It takes a whole team of people and a whole plethora of types of individuals to be able to make this industry work. So this is definitely something that I've always had an interest in being able to know more about. And so today we are talking about enhanced oil recovery and CCS, or carbon capture systems, or carbon capture utilization systems, and how they work together with each other. So, like as always, guys, let me know where you're watching from. Let me know in the comments if this is the very first episode that you've ever tuned into, because I know we got a lot of people that were, signing up for the event that I'd never seen, and names I hadn't seen before. So, if this is your first time watching, please let us know. LinkedIn has a whole new look and feel to it, whether it's on mobile or on the desktop. So let us know what your thoughts are about that, even though we're not supposed to talk about LinkedIn on LinkedIn Live, but we're also on Facebook and YouTube. So if you guys are on either one of those, let us know where you're watching from. Comments are still slow to roll in, but that's just part of the normal show now. I don't know what it is. It always seems to just trickle in there at the beginning. We've got plenty of people watching. So guys, let me know where you're watching from. What part of the world are you in? What part of the industry do you work in? And we'll get your name and information up there on the screen. And as always, today's show is brought to you by Gibson Reports. So be sure to go and check out GibsonReports.com. One favor to ask, if you are on GibsonReports.com, go to the GibsonReports.com/Vidor Locksmith. There you'll be able to find a email newsletter sign up, which I forgot to send out last night. I just remembered. Sorry, guys. I'm going to do better at that. I really am. I need to be able to, I don't know whether I just need to automate it or something like that. Maybe I'll get with Fahim. He's the smart intellectual guy on the team. Maybe I'll just put it on his to-do list that he has to remind me that every Thursday or whenever. Or you guys let me know when's the best time to be able to send out the email for reminding everybody that the show's coming on. Anyways, my bad. I messed up. it happens. I will continue to mess up and I will continue to make mistakes, but we will try to learn from them and get better. This is the best oil and gas live streaming show in the industry, so you're not going to see much better than this. But and I was told that this show is actually in the top 1% of all live streaming shows in the world, like of all. I mean, outside of like ABC and what they're broadcasting, but they said like if you can get into double digits viewers at the same time, you're in the top 1%. So normally we get to like triple digits with the show. So pretty excited about that. So some of the people that are tuning in this morning, we've got Grant Pruitt, guys over there, Pruitt MPD. Love to have those guys. He's the CEO over there and he's watching the show. Grant, thanks for being here. We really do appreciate it. We need to get you guys on the show one of these days. So thank you for being here. We've got Ken Webb watching from Lafayette, Louisiana. Rolf saying hello from London. Rolf is one of these guys. He's always watching the show. We really do appreciate it. Stefano watching on YouTube saying hello from here in Texas. This is his first time. Zephyr from Turkey. So thanks for being here. Glidden, Rana from Pakistan. Nicole Hill in Houston, Texas. Nicole, thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, one of my other, I've been on Ryan's show. He's another LinkedIn live streamer. He does a live cast. It's called The Example Show. If you've ever been interested in doing something like this, like what I'm doing right now, live streaming or whatnot, he's got an amazing show. He interviews people like myself and other live streamers. Go check it out. Ryan, thanks so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. We've got a LinkedIn user from Midland, Texas. I hope there's a whole bunch of people from Midland, Texas watching this right now because I think this show is going to be really specific to some of you guys out there. Other things, if you guys can, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I am working on a project to be able to do a remote live streaming event, but I need YouTube to do it. I can't do it on LinkedIn. So it kind of gives away a little bit of the secret sauce of what we're going to do. But I have to hit 1,000 subscribers before I can live stream on mobile platform. So it's purely just a technicality. Like I'm only asking people to be able to do that just so that we can try a show out. If it doesn't work and it fails miserably, unsubscribe afterwards, go on about your day. I promise. That's all we're trying to do. Then we've got, I can't even, his initials are DK and he's watching from India. Thank you so much, sir, for being here. No echo. Is there an echo? Is there what? I'm hearing a bad echo. Anyone else hearing that? Check the mic. I don't know. All right. Well, if you're watching on two different platforms, like if you've got YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn running, maybe those might be doing the echo thing. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you guys all so much for being here. I think I've gotten through all of my random thoughts and information to be able to tell you guys. I do want to say congratulations to Peanut Butter and Jelly 2020 for winning the food election at my household. So there we go. All right, guys. So if you guys haven't heard, and if you guys haven't been watching the show here recently, I have an amazing person who's joined the team recently. His name is Fahim. He is a absolutely amazing data scientist, artificial intelligence. I mean, he's absolutely killing it with Python for Gibson Reports right now. And in my effort to be able to help him in his job search, yes, he is working for us, but there's definitely bigger and better things than just working for Gibson Reports and myself. So in my effort to be able to help him out, we've started a segment of the show called Minute with Fahim. So here we go. Let me go ahead and pull this up. Didn't have all of this ready like I should have, but here we go. And there you go.
Hello, everyone. So this week, I want to talk to you a little bit more about Postgres. I want to mention the release of Barman version 2.12. Barman is basically the backup and recovery management system for Postgres that helps you to take backups and helps you recover from like disaster recovery situations. And this new update that just came out yesterday, actually, what it allows you to do is if your Postgres and like the user is working on the same server that's running the cluster, you can run your backup and recovery process without having to go through the SSH tunnel if you have one set up. So SSH is basically like, we use it for, like advanced security measures when people are remotely accessing your thing, right? So usually, even if you were on the same server that's having all the data, you would still need to go through the troubles of like figuring out the SSS protocols and all of that. But now this new release helps it sync up so that if you're running on the same server, you don't have to go through the troubles of like figuring out the SSH. You can just bypass it and you can still run your backup and sync. So the new feature, I think it's called local rsync. I'll post more notes about it on my profile. I can put something on the comments, and yeah, that's actually all I wanted to mention this week. David?
And that was your minute with Fahim. Fahim, thank you so much. I cannot stress enough like how awesome this guy is. Like what he's able to do and the creativity he uses in being able to do some of the data sciences stuff is absolutely amazing. I look forward to the day when a larger organization is able to see what I see in him and be able to steal him away and be able to do absolutely amazing things. And if not, for him to be able to just find a whole bunch of clients and be able to start his own thing. Either way, I'm happy for him. He's doing an amazing job. Guys, if you are watching this and you're enjoying the show, if you've enjoyed any of the shows, I'm telling you right now, please share this. Tag, if you're on desktop, tag one of your friends in the comment section. I tried this on mobile on somebody else's show the other day. I don't think you can tag anybody if you're on mobile watching this. You kind of got to be on desktop to be able to tag somebody else. If you're on mobile, just jump out real quick, share it to your feed, let other people know to be able to come in and join in the conversation. Otherwise, it'll just be us and we get to ask all of our own questions. So you can be selfish and keep it to yourself, or you can be nice and share. Sharing is caring. So with that, I'm going to show you guys this. We're getting ready to kick off season 2 of How It's Done. If you haven't seen any of the How It's Done, go over to the YouTube channel. Check those out. They're absolutely awesome. We've been filming season 2. We're getting those wrapped up as quick as we can. We'll hopefully be able to launch within the next month or two, the first couple of episodes. But we were hoping to be able to do 15 episodes in season 2. But it's going to be an absolutely amazing show in How It's Done. So after the commercial break, we're going to be bringing on our guest, Matt Flannery from Stratum Reservoir, and we're going to be answering all of your questions on enhanced oil recovery and carbon capture systems. Oh, one more update before I forget. Next week is Graham Mintz of Wilmot. That's just huge. So Graham's actually watching the show today. Graham, thank you for being here. I would click the thing, but it's not ready right now. So here we go. I get so excited watching that every time. So here he is. Without further ado, Matt Flannery. Thank you so much, Matt, for being here on the show today. I am super excited to have you here. Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks, Dad. That was because there was an echo earlier. So thanks, Dave. It's a pleasure to be on the show. Really honored to be on Gibson Reports, and appreciate the time. Yeah, opportunity.
I mean, like I said in the intro, this is something I'm really, really excited about because I know so little about it, but I also know how important it is. So I always kind of make the mistake, like I usually don't give like whoever the guest is the chance to be able to kind of introduce themselves and say their background. I like to just like dive right into everything. So I have to pull it back a little bit, give us a quick intro about yourself, and then we'll jump right into the meat of things.
Sure, great, thanks. So by training, I'm a chemist originally. I joined Shell in 2000, about 20 years ago. It's gone quickly. I was initially in flow assurance, which is the field that makes sure that fluids continue flowing the way they're expected to. And after about 5 years there, I moved into a group called Fluid Evaluation and Sampling Technology, or the FEAST team. And what was particularly interesting about that group was that it brought together a number of different disciplines to give an overview of how the fluids were going to be characterized, as well as the formation as well, and the kind of interactions that were there. So I did that for about 10 years, and then I moved to BHP, where I had initially a technical role and then a series of semi-technical, semi-management roles, leading a series of multidisciplinary teams. And in 2015, I became an independent consultant, so providing those kind of insights to a range of different operators around the world, from small mom and pops through to NOCs. And in January this year, I joined Stratum Reservoir, which was a company that was carved out of Weatherford. Formerly, it was the section called Weatherford Labs, and that was back in March last year. And since January, I have been part of Stratum Reservoir. And yeah, it's like I said, this brings us to today. The last 9 months have gone past very quickly. They certainly haven't been exactly as I would have expected, but I think it's true for just about everybody in the world right now.
Yeah, I think the running joke is anybody in 2015 that was asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years, was wrong.
Pretty much. Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously with, what's taken place over the last 9 months, like you mentioned, the financials for drilling wells, producing wells, continuing to operate as a E&P company or just a producing company anywhere, just I should say in general in the oil and gas, whether it's oil and gas E&P or oil field services, has changed. So obviously there's a lot of pressure there as far as being able to get as much out of the ground as possible. And it's always been my kind of belief that like anything past just normal measures was like enhanced oil recovery. So I know from our conversation the other day, that was wrong. So can you give like a little bit to the audience on what really is the definition of enhanced oil recovery? Yeah,
absolutely. So enhanced oil recovery or EOR, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's more than what the oil and really it's petroleum. So it's a combination of the oil and the gas that will come out of the ground. And it's a broad term that covers quite a number of different technologies. And there are, I guess it could most easily be broken down into, say, 3 different categories. There's thermal, then there's gas, and so-called chemical, which usually when we talk about chemicals, we mean artificial or man-made chemicals. Obviously, the entire world is made up of chemicals at some level. There are some that would argue that microbial is a separate category, but that tends to be a much smaller proportion. So generally, EOR overall tends to apply to thermal, gas, and chemical. And today, I mean, we're going to be focusing on talking about the gas because that has the most logical segue through to the carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. But for the first part, we're definitely going to be talking about the different options that are available because there are a lot of choices. And it can be broadly categorized, those applications, into secondary recovery and tertiary recovery. And the line between secondary and tertiary, it's kind of blurred. And depending on the particular asset that you're working with and who you're talking to, then you can spend a lot of time arguing over details. But what it really comes down to are things which are done to the reservoir mainly through injection of either an injectant, so a liquid or a gas, and or energy, in particular heat, usually in the form of steam. That's the most common, but also by causing underground, essentially fires. And those are less common as well worldwide, but mostly steam. So injecting fluids and then dissolved and suspended chemicals and injecting heat. That's what makes it enhanced oil recovery. That's what distinguishes it from what will naturally flow out of the ground simply due to the pressure differential and the permeability and viscosity of the rock and fluids, respectively.
So obviously, like I said, I touched on it just a little bit ago as far as like, the finances of what's taking place in the industry. Like we need to now be able to get squeeze every drop that we can out of every well. But obviously not every well is a candidate for EOR. What are the things like that, if somebody owns and operates a well that if they see their decline curve that it's either dropping off or it stayed steady? Like, what are the key things to be able to look for, and how can somebody say, like, whether they need to know, like, okay, I need to be able to call the experts. I'm not going to plug anyone in particular, but they could call like Stratum Reservoir, they could call you guys. What is it that they should be looking for to be able to see if their well's an actual candidate for being able to do some kind of EOR mechanism?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's I wish there was a nice tidy set of kind of key points that we will be able to capture that would answer, for all the different wells. But the fact is that if one considers the range of geology, the range of temperatures and pressures, the range of the fluid types as well, it would be disingenuous to claim that there's a one-size-fits-all or a cookie-cutter approach is going to be suitable. And so what I would say is that there are a few things that need to be considered in choosing the right EOR for the operator's particular well or asset. I'll start this out with saying most plays are amenable to EOR in some form or some manner. The applicability comes down to, and whether people choose to do it, comes down to a number of factors on the logistics, the time frame, the objectives, and so on. But from an absolute possibility standpoint, almost any play has at least a potential for some sort of enhanced oil production. So what I would say is, breaking down into, and I just kind of jotted down some notes here, that there's two categories. You got to think about the geology of your play, and then the engineering that we have either put in place already, or the options that are available to take advantage of what the geology has already presented with us. So initially, it's the fluids. Yeah, this whole industry is about producing the petroleum, and so understanding the phase behavior of the fluids in place. Do you have a condensate? Do you have a, for the sake of argument, the term a typical black oil? Do you have a heavy oil? What's the GOR? What are the respective?
Wait, hold on. What's GOR?
Yeah. Sorry, good question. So gas oil ratio.
Okay.
So when
everybody's about to find out how little I know about our industry.
No worries. I didn't know this at the beginning either. So but I don't know. So it was essentially when we have any liquid and gas that are together at high enough temperature and pressure, particularly pressure, one will dissolve in the other. We see this in everyday life. The water is dissolved in the air, and you see that in the mornings when the temperature drops and you have dew on the ground or you have fog. That's the water coming out of solution from being dissolved in the air. Similarly, if you raise the temperature again of water in your kettle, some of the water will turn to gas, and then you see that with bubbles coming through to the surface. With something like CO2, where you have different compositions, soda water, at high pressure, in a soda water bottle, the CO2 is dissolved, and if you hold up a typical bottle of mineral water, you won't see the bubbles, or maybe you'll just see one or two. You drop the pressure by opening the cap, and now you've changed the pressure scenario. The pressure is dropped, and then the gas comes out of solution, and that's when you see all the bubbles coming up. And so oil is similar to, or petroleum is similar to that, to the mineral water scenario, where in the rock at depth, it's at high pressure, and the gas component is dissolved in the liquid, and so then it gets produced, comes out of solution, and typically there's a liquid stream then and a gas stream that comes to the surface, and then those are partitioned in a separator, and then processed as a gas stream, which is going to be your methane, ethane, propane, butane, and pentane that feature in everyday life, from your range cooker through to your LPG or your propane and butane gas burners. You say take camping.
Propane and propane accessories.
Exactly. And so then you have the other component, which is typically your hexane and heavier, and that goes through the range that we would typically say put into a car, which is your gasoline range. That's normally about it's normally C7 through to about C12. We hear about high octane fuels, and that's because there's a lot of C8 octane. The names are pretty sequential, just following what you'd expect from the kind of Latin of the words. And then the rest of the liquids will be used for various other applications in everyday life, from diesel, jet fuel, feedstocks for all sorts of, in fact, pretty much everything we use in modern day life: plastics, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, paints, artificial materials, So, and then the highest end is the highest molecular weight is probably going to be what we put on our roads, so asphalts, and we make roof shingles out of them. So those are all dissolved together in the subsurface, and how they interact with each other at temperatures and pressures. That's the phase behavior. What phase are they in? Are they in solid, liquid, or gas phase? And that all responds to the temperatures and pressures that the fluid is going to experience. So understanding that is in fact, any operator is going to understand those anyway. And there are different levels of granularity that can be applied to that. But everybody has to understand that from the production side, because that's how the fluids are valued. And so that's the first one. Then the second is going to be interfacial tension. And this is how the petroleum in place is going to interact with water or gas, or if you're adding surfactants, so those are like detergents, how is that going to change? And the interfacial tension really is how easily trying to put this into a reference, is how easily the two fluids interact with each other. And I would say, an example is that if you're, say, doing a washing up and you've got oil, say from salad dressing, and you're mixing in with the tap water, and you'll see that the oil is separating out as little droplets, and that's because the interfacial tension is high and they don't like to mix with each other. You add some detergent, a break that lowers the interfacial tension, and the oil will dissolve in the water, and you see a completely different behavior. You don't see the fluids operating separately. So understanding the interfacial tension, and thus between two liquids, you also have the same thing with solids as well. I guess a good example would be, why do we wax cars? It's one of them is to protect from the water. Wax and water have high interfacial tension, and the water will just run off your car because it changes the wettability of the surface. And so we do the same thing in the reservoir. We change the wettability of the reservoir so that it becomes less oil wet, more water wet, and it encourages the oil to then leave and come out of the well, which is where we can then capture it and use it for all of the things that we use oil for. I would also say then the rocket, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was like, I hope somebody's got a product out there called Turtle Wax just for that.
Yeah, reservoir wax. Yeah.
Yeah, reservoir turtle wax.
So I guess then the next is
trademarked.
So I guess the next question is the porosity of your reservoir. What's the pore size distribution like? Remember, reservoir rock it's not crystalline. It has holes in it. That's where the oil is found. And how well, first of all, what is the distribution of those holes like, and how well are they connected? Some rocks have holes which aren't connected to each other, and that's called vuggy porosity. And those are almost like, if you can almost imagine, bubbles in the rock, and that they don't have any connectivity to each other. I guess so. In those kind of rocks, there is porosity, but there isn't very much permeability. So understanding how your rocks are actually connected, and there can be multiple kind of different regimes of that, depending on how the grains have been sorted when they were originally laid down, and those sediments were deposited. And then I guess the other is going to be the relative densities of the fluids that are being injected relative to what's in place, and how that sits relative to the orientation of your reservoir. Not all reservoirs are neatly horizontal. Some of them are tilted. Some of them have very steep dip. And then where are your respective wells in that production? That influences what the decisions are. So that covers the geology side. And actually, no, the final one would be the mobility. How viscous are your fluids, and how easily do they flow? So typically, the more gas that's dissolved is going to lower the viscosity. Typically, the higher temperature lowers the viscosity. And that's why EOR centers around injectants that either A, push the fluids out, or B, reduce the viscosity, or C, change the temperature, which then reduces the viscosity. And then that brings us to the engineering, which is obviously a lot more under our control. What type of wells are we talking about? How distant are they spaced from each other? And how well connected? How are they being completed? We hear a lot about fracking. We hear a lot about horizontal wells, but there are also other different types of completions as well from the conventional side. And the style in which wells have been completed makes a difference regarding the options which are available for a successful EOR job, or project. And I suppose the other is going to be the timing. Relative to production. Has the field already been in production for a while? Is it about to come on production? Is this a late field life? EOR can be applied to pretty much any stage along the way. And in fact, some of the most economically lucrative applications are much earlier in the field life. It's counterintuitive from the name. And the reason why it's come up as enhanced oil recovery is because it's often only considered later on, when perhaps a field has moved from one owner to another, that a later owner will then see that as an opportunity and think, well, I can put some time and effort and thought into this and get more out than has been done maybe when the field was initially explored or brought on production 20 years earlier, when perhaps some of this technology didn't even exist. But that doesn't mean that we're constrained to only using EOR late in field life. It can be applied right away from day one, in fact. So there's that. And then I suppose the other is going to be the actual costs, obviously, of versus the expected returns. And so that comes down to actually putting all of this together and making a business judgment on the economics and what the return time is going to be, and with the associated risk and uncertainty that comes with everything in life.
So that's almost like, I've got a ton of questions, but for that last statement there, so essentially that becomes like enhanced reservoir engineering, because at that point you've already done reservoir engineering to be able to drill the well, but now you've got to be able to do it again to be able to see if all of the things that you just mentioned, which were only just a couple, real simple things, if all of those can come into play and to be able to make sense with the current strip price, essentially, correct?
It's true. Yeah, I would say one of the myths, though, is that because EOR is additional technology, it is probably uneconomic, and it's simply not true. That's one of the most commonly held myths. It is absolutely economic in our sub $40 environment, and many techniques are economic down to 25 even. And the question comes into how much of your existing infrastructure would you like to get value out of? And one of the big advantages about EOR is that it really accentuates the amount, first of all, the amount of recovery of oil in place, but it also maximizes the use and value of the existing infrastructure. So that has an economic as well as an environmental and logistical impact as well.
So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm trying to be able to do this without notes. So we've got essentially three different categories there. One, we've got essentially what I would call like the environmental, what's below the surface, something we have essentially no role in except for the fact that that's where we put the well. But once the well's there, it's there. You've got engineering. It was how did we be able to construct and put the well there, and then it's the final piece is essentially the financial aspect. So the question I have is, in that middle part, you say with the engineering, because this is, I guess, mainly for like the drilling side of it for me, is there anything that's done on the drilling side that affects whether an EOR campaign can be possible or not? Like are longer laterals, are larger hole sizes, are are there anything that's beneficial? Like if you guys see it, you come across your desk and you're like, oh, they did this, thank God. Or, oh, you look at the surveys and you're like, oh, it's a perfectly straight wellbore. This makes everything so much easier. Because I know there's a lot within the drilling side of the industry to be able to connect back to production and be able to show that there's positive benefits. Is there anything that you've ever seen there on your side of it that there may be a correlation?
So that's a good question. It would be, it really comes down to the particular play. Generally, most wells are going to be amenable to some form of EOR. Certainly, what I would say in answer to specifically to your question about some of the laterals and the unconventional side, there are two main categories of EOR that one applies to conventional, and that's the one which has been around for the longest. But then there's what's called GC EOR, which stands for gas cycling enhanced oil recovery, and that is particularly suitable for the unconventional side. And in that, I guess I will kind of have a quick description of the difference. In GC EOR, we have a well with a lateral, and there's the initial production, and then there's the injectant will be pushed into the well and forced into the existing fractures and pore spaces, allowed to soak for a while and dissolve in the remaining fluids that haven't been produced, and then produced back out, and then that is cycled over and over. And it's the nickname or acronym, the terminology is used as a huff and puff approach, because it goes over and over and over, and it's kind of if for a given particular well. And the discrepancy or the difference rather between conventional is that you normally with conventional you normally have EOR, you would have two wells where one is injected and the injection well, and the other one is going to be the production well. But for the unconventionals, it's going to be analogous to rinsing out the rock, really. Similar to, say, again, coming back to washing up, you can see how I spend a fair amount of my time. Is if you have a sponge and you put some soap into it, wash the dishes, and squeeze it out, you'll see a lot of soap running out, but not all the soap has come out. And so if you put more water into it and then squeeze it again, then there'll still be some more soap will come out, and so on and so on. And it can take multiple applications of that before you get all of the soap out. And that's essentially what happens with the GC EOR.
It sounds like me in college when I was trying to, keep my bills low by using as much of the shampoo bottle as possible.
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. So where it impacts the drilling is what that does ultimately is that lowers your break-even cost for your oil prices, because you're getting more out for each well, which makes the drilling more economic. If you can increase your ultimate estimated recovery per well without having to put down more wells, that means that wells become more economic and more fields which otherwise wouldn't be considered as viable become viable. And so even though we're getting more oil out of each well, it actually makes the whole drilling scenario more attractive, because you don't need to have such a high price because you're getting more oil out of each well. So from that standpoint, it's a huge economic driver. And a typical primary production could be anywhere between, say, 15 and 30%, depending on how good your well is and how good the rock is and the fluids and so on. But
so that was actually a question I was going to answer. So, like, let's say that the total what's below the surface, just for sake to make it easy, it's 100 barrels or 100 gallons, whatever it is. It's just 100. So through initially drilling the well and it having its own pressure and pushing fluid to the surface, and then pump jack or whatever, you're saying anywhere between 15 to 30% is what we're actually able to get out of the ground.
Yeah, that's right. And we would normally refer to that as the original oil in place, or the the OIIP rather. So
okay.
Yeah. So those would determine your initial economics. We're using the gas cycling. With each successive cycle, we will get incrementally more oil out of the reservoir. And it's not unusual to have numbers as high as 75 or 80% recovery of the original oil in place. So the OIP. It's a question of, again, when the gas cycling is begun, how long it's left to soak, what the rock properties are like, how the fluids interact, and all those things I just talked about. But if you imagine your typical well could maybe, double or even triple the total amount of oil which is produced, what that does to the economics. It takes a little bit longer because you have to go through this cycle, but your total amount of recovery is going to be significantly more, and then that makes the economics that much more attractive.
So in that instance, would it be good to be able to start the EOR planning from the very beginning stages of the well, maybe looking at if a well that was drilled 10, 15 years ago or whatever and is using EOR, then to be able to say, okay, for this campaign, we're planning EOR from the start. Is that the most ideal time to be able to?
Yeah. Yes, that's absolutely right. To plan it from the beginning, because the improvement in the recovery also gives you the opportunity to address some of the uncertainties of your play as you produce. One of the things that is it's a challenge is that changing the way a field is being produced late in the field life, sometimes it requires a little bit of extra investigation or understanding the formation or figuring out what could be done with the engineering that's already in place. If those decisions are made early, then any of those changes can be made as part of the incremental development plan of the field. We can look at the development plan and see how they have performed before we then commit to subsequent decisions. And it gives us opportunity to understand how what kind of heterogeneities exist within the field earlier on, and so that then decisions are made as part of the development plan. It's always better to have a more accurate, appropriate plan rather than to try to retrofit.
Is there any point in time in a well or that you guys have run into where it's like, if you guys would have called us like a year or two ago, this would have been perfect, but now that you've depleted all the water, you've depleted all the gas, or you've gotten to a certain point in the well's life that now it's actually cost prohibitive because you took too long to be able to enact a plan? Does that happen?
Unfortunately, yes, that can happen, and it has happened. And part of that, I guess, is there's two aspects. One is that the field might have been left to go so long without additional recovery that the efficiencies that remain are not going to be economic. Another could be cash flow, and the incremental returns later on, they don't end up balancing out the capital that's needed in order to start the EOR earlier on in the field life. That's when there's an opportunity to solve both of those issues. Occasionally it does happen. That said, there is no one solution for it. It's not like each scenario only has a unique solution. There are usually multiple options. And so even if you have a field which is late in field life, it's definitely worth having that conversation and coming to the conclusion this is not working for us should be the result of an investigation and a review, and not just because, well, we never looked at it.
So I want to circle back to something. So when we were talking about original oil in place, and you said, we could go from 15 to 30% is what's producible, and then you mentioned that we could have a substantial increase in that. What's the is there a difference there between unconventional and conventional wells? Is it like with unconventional wells you're able to get another 5-10%, or you can go beyond that? And then, what would be kind of the numbers compared to conventionals? And then if you can, what's a best case? Like, what's something that's like, your best success story, what you've been able to do with unconventionals? Because obviously that's what a lot of what's taking place in U.S. land right now. Not to ignore everybody else, but hey.
Sure, absolutely. And I realize that we have a global audience as well, and so
and we thank you guys all for watching.
So I would say that the recovery factors are kind of comparable between the two. From conventional as well, you can typically see certainly 60-70%, sometimes 80 to 90 in an ideal scenario. It comes down to incremental returns as well. Often getting those last few percent is more expensive than say the first 10%, and at some point there's an inflection between, okay, are we really trying to get the last 3 or 4%? Are we happy with 80%? Because the next 5% is going to be that much more expensive, and it's not going to be feasible. So that normally is what determines the decision to call it on additional techniques. But unconventional and conventional returns, they can be comparable, absolutely. And I guess one of the other myths is that high permeability rock is not suitable for EOR because we have very high residual oil saturations, and that's another myth which is simply not true. It comes down to choosing the right kind of injectant and deployment as well. I guess from the deployment standpoint, understanding the reservoir, one of the reasons where conventional may fail is if the formation, if there are flow variations in the formation which haven't been anticipated. So perhaps there might be subseismic faults which act as baffles to how the fluid is moving through. Perhaps there's channelization that wasn't anticipated. Those are maybe there are fracture networks or high permeability zones which they go by the name of thief zones, where the injectant preferentially flows through and then doesn't displace the fluid in the other parts of the reservoir. There are strategies to deal with all of those. They need to be assessed up front, though. What I would say is coming back to understanding the reservoir. A good evaluation plan at the beginning pays for itself easily 100, sometimes several hundred times over. Simply because one approach worked on one field doesn't automatically mean that that's the way it's going to work for everything else. Rock varies in its composition, in the grain size distribution. There are variations in fluids across a field. Understanding the reservoir is key because each EOR approach really has to be tailored to that particular play.
Excellent. All right. So now, hey, guys, anybody that is watching, guys and gals, anybody that is watching, if you guys have got any questions, start firing them off. We're going to start getting them in here. I know the other part that we were going to talk about with this is the CCS. So Jose's fired off a couple of questions here. So what are reservoir characteristics or ideal, let's try this again. Ideal to inject CO2 as EOR and best reservoir to storage CO2?
Thanks, Ho. That's a really great question. I would say, so there's a couple of things. One is really the reservoir would have to be at least 2,000 feet deep or at least 600 meters deep. The best scenario for storing CO2 is injecting it when it's in its supercritical state. And so we need to have there is a minimum pressure. So at least 2,000 feet deep, ideally deeper than 3,000 feet, so at least 1 kilometer of depth. Permeability has to be at least greater than 1 millidarcy for storage. And viscosity, if you're injecting into a saline aquifer, then obviously you're just injecting into the brine. But if you're injecting into an oil, there's a couple of things. One is one needs to make sure that the oil doesn't become unstable with respect to asphaltenes. Injecting CO2 into a depleted petroleum reservoir can cause, as I mentioned earlier with the phase behavior, it can cause the component of oil, which is known as the asphaltenes, because it's similar to what we put on the road, asphalt. That's exactly where it comes from. And those will come out of solution and block off your pore spaces, and so that would impair your efficiency. Now, there are things that can be done to deal with that, but that needs to be assessed. But I would say also from the viscosity standpoint, the in situ viscosity, so that's not on the surface, that's in the reservoir, has to be at least less than 1,000 centipoise, and ideally less than 10 centipoise. If it's more than 1,000 centipoise, it's probably not a good candidate.
That's legitimately a word I've never heard.
Centipoise is it's a unit of measurement of viscosity, named after, I think it was a French scientist, Poise. So yeah, it's a measurement of viscosity. How runny is your fluid?
Learn something new every day. That's why I love this show. This is great. I hope that answers the question. So then that kind of segues us into a little bit about the discussion of carbon capture systems and then carbon capture utilization systems in EOR and in their own right, their own little entity. Can you tell us a little bit about what's the difference between those two, and then how do those play into EOR?
Yeah, absolutely. So carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. We've heard a lot about CCS. More recently, we're hearing about CCUS, and the U is utilization, and CO2 injection as part of EOR is a prime example of that. The idea of carbon capture, utilization, sequestration is taking the carbon dioxide that we have in the atmosphere and putting it underground into the subsurface, ideally for all intents and purposes forever. Once it is underground for, it's measured in years, it depends on the rock formation, but typically decades to centuries, it will eventually become rock, carbonate rock, in which case it's permanently there. So where does the overlap come with CO2? Well, the projects which are being considered today about carbon capture and sequestration, they address the injection of CO2, supercritical CO2, into deep saline aquifers, into porous rock, and historically we've done this with EOR for petroleum recovery, also into depleted petroleum reservoirs, and then into coal seams as well, particularly which are either uneconomic or which have historically been used for coal bed methane. We won't talk about that so much. We're going to be focusing on the fluids. The questions which face us as a society, but also as an industry, they are almost identical to the kind of questions that we've had to deal with from oil and gas production. So characterization of the formation. What's the geology, the heterogeneity, the shape of the reservoir, pore volume, compressibility, how is it connected, the mineralogy of the formation in place, and how does it react to chemicals which are injected, in this case, carbon dioxide. It's worth keeping in mind that when carbon dioxide mixes with water, it forms carbonic acid, which is it's weakly acidic solution, but that will dissolve some rocks like carbonates. It can also cause some clays to swell if it's wet CO2. If it's a dry CO2, it can cause some clays to shrink. So what, you might think? Well, if your rock is actually swelling or shrinking underground, that's going to change the amount of pore space which is available. It's also going to add stresses which don't exist before we start injecting the CO2. And so that can then lead to fractures, either because of shrinking or fractures because of expansion, and then relief of the stress gets transferred to other layers of rock. So understanding the rock mechanics, the mineralogy, the interaction between the CO2 and the formation fluids in place and the rock, those are all key to successful CCUS project. From an engineering standpoint, as you said before, Dave, the idea of an enhanced or enhanced reservoir engineering, you're absolutely right. Again, we've got fluids that are being injected into a porous medium. How fast can we inject? What's the maximum rate we could inject? Because that all impacts the economics, but it also impacts the physics. If you inject too fast, you're going to fracture the rock, same as we do intentionally, when we have completions and laterals. Unintentional fractures, not so popular. Understanding the strengths of the formations that we're injecting into, as well as any formations that overlie them that are going to be the sealing areas. How do these pressure buildups, how do they dissipate through the reservoir as well? If there's an interruption, what happens to the pressure wave and the transient effects of pressure through the reservoir? What happens if we have a change in the composition that's being injected? One of the things which I think is most interesting and most exciting about the future for CCUS is that historically, CO2 injection has only been seen as a means to increase the production of oil and gas, and it's been seen as a cost in order to do so. As we move into our target of a carbon neutral future, being able to, and as prices on tons per CO2 become much more stable in future, being able to take CO2 that comes out of someone else's manufacturing process and then dispose of it, that becomes a revenue source in and of itself. It's a service. And so it's no longer just a cost. Now it's actually something which generates revenue in and of itself, whether it's being injected, say, into a saline aquifer simply for sequestration, or it's actually being used then to add to the production of petroleum. So those components. Sorry.
So that's huge there, because then, so you're saying it's like we could have a depleted well. Like, let's say we've done all the EOR techniques that we can. We get to a point where it's like, okay, there's that, like you said, the last 5, 10, 15% remaining. We've got diminishing returns as far as being able to get that last little bit out. But now it's essentially, if we were here in the state of Texas or somewhere, they say, okay, now it's time to plug and abandon the well. But now if this well has the characteristics that fits a carbon capture or a carbon capture system like that we could store in, then the economics of the well kind of goes from being a producing well to being essentially a storage facility.
That's right. It's a destination. It's a target destination for or a repository for CO2. Absolutely right. And yeah.
So then, I'm sorry to interrupt, but my mind is just going a million miles an hour here. Like, so now we could say that, okay, XYZ company down the street that's, trying to offset their carbon footprint could now say, hey, you've got X number of units of carbon. We've got X plus 5. We can take whatever you've got plus a little more and be able to stick it down in the hole, and we're only going to charge you this much, almost like a saltwater disposal well.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good analogy. Yeah. So the first of all, the economic attractiveness of that is obviously makes a difference to whether these projects are funded or not. But also there's the aspect of minimizing the kind of impact that we have on the environment for the associated infrastructure as well, because a lot of these operations can use existing infrastructure. And so what I mean by environmental impact on that, well, if you have to sink a new well or put a new pipeline in, that's a lot of metal. And where does that metal come from? Well, it comes from mines. And so then there's the whole side of then having to dig that out of the ground, and then the heating up of the metal or the iron ore to then generate the iron, which then makes steel, and the logistics of putting it in place. All that side of things is minimized by reutilization of existing infrastructure as well. So there's a number of different points on which the attractiveness of using these EOR techniques as being the logical segue into CCUS. I mean, historically, it's obviously been a part of this, the U particularly, for utilization. But having this as being the logical application it's hard to resist it, I got to say. And I got to say, one of the things that I enjoy in my role, and I realized I forgot to mention this at the beginning, my role as Director of Geoscience and Engineering is at Stratum, is being able to see how all these different areas, these disciplines, how they intersect. It's like having this fantastic Venn diagram of where we've got geology and engineering and fluid behavior that all overlap to come up with these solutions that take advantage of existing technology and existing expertise, but apply them to new targets that end up, just being a win-win situation.
I hate to do this, but I'm like robbing this of everybody else's questions. So I've got a couple of questions here to be able to kind of throw together. So obviously we've got a well, we could store carbon in it. Carbon is carbon or CO2 priced like a commodity or like how is that done? It's like if I've got 10 of these that I got to get rid of, and it's like, oh, if I can take those 10 carbon units or whatever off of you and stick them down into my well, is there an evaluation there? And so then it also kind of becomes this thing. It's like, okay, once the well's completed, then you do not, we talked about reservoir engineering, enhanced oil reservoir engineering, and now it's carbon well reservoir engineering. So You've got almost like a third portion of this, like it could almost be like a case study. It's like, okay, a well produces this much carbon in its lifetime, but at the end of it, it becomes a 10x storage facility at this price point. And have studies like that been done to be able to say, like, a standard West Texas oil well or something could be able to store this much of a carbon footprint and then be able to offset the cost at these markers? I mean, it's like, obviously it's a very complicated thing, but is that what what you and your company and your organization is looking at as far as going into the future?
That's a good question. So the quick answer from the financial standpoint is we don't do that. We provide the insight into the geology and the phase behavior and the parameters the engineering would need to take into account. So we would work on that side of things. And I had a response to the beginning of your question, and it's just slipped my mind. With the price of carbon, depending on where you are in the world, there are different regimes. It's unfortunate that the whole world hasn't come together on an agreed price per carbon, price per ton of carbon, rather. In the United States, I would direct folks to Section Q45 of the Internal Revenue Service guide. That will have all the details on the different tax credits which are available for storing CO2 underground. It varies depending on what the application is, whether it's going to be used for production of petroleum, for example, or whether it's simply being stored in place. So I don't want to give tax advice out on your show. I would say go to Section Q45 though in the US.
Matt Flannery is not a certified public accountant.
I certainly am not.
Little asterisk on the show there.
That's right. So in other parts of the world, there are different regimes. There are parts. So Europe has certain grants which are in place, for example. And the UK has some investment incentives which are in place. Wherever you are, I would encourage you to look at the local regulations. There is no, again, one size fits all on this, but there certainly are incentives in a lot of the major economies, and the US is one of those.
I mean, to me, it almost sounds like something to where, we have here in the state of Texas what we call orphan wells. And these are wells that have either been abandoned or lost track of, or, an E&P operator or small producing company went belly up and was not able to plug and abandon a well. And so now it's just kind of sitting there. And so anyone in the state of Texas, and this is great information for anybody out there, you can go and take ownership of that well, but you just have to be able to show that you'll sign off on the responsibilities of being able to P&A the well if you're not able to produce anything. So now to me, it almost sounds like these orphan wells could almost become self-storage facilities or you've got these rent a storage facilities that pop up everywhere, but now you've got one underground, and you can start calling on people. It's like, hey, I've got a spot to be able to put your CO2. Market price is this. I'll give you this. I mean, you're doing essentially the reverse of like a pipeline kind of thing. And he's like, this is how much it costs you. You're producing this much, and then I can store it for you.
That's a great idea. I hadn't really thought about it. The only thing that would come to mind is making sure that there aren't unexpected leaks. As I said, each scenario has got a
which actually brings up a great point. So Scott McNeil said in here, well is a storage well as long as CO2 stays down. Well integrity equals compatibility, casing, cement, and tubular design. So Scott, thank you so much for watching. He's one of the great guys. He's super smart. He knows everything. Every time we have somebody on here, he's always got great comments.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Scott. I completely agree. That's kind of where I was going with that. If you haven't designed if the well wasn't designed or assessed, there is no one size fits all. And just because it works on a well-designed well, but an appropriately designed well with compatible cement and metallurgy, you can't just pick out any old well and start pumping CO2 into it and expect it's going to be fine. Because remember, you're going to be increasing the pressure. You're going to be potentially swelling the clays, all those variables that I was talking about earlier, possibly dehydrating the formation brines, which could lead to precipitation. I would say one of the other components that is worth considering also is having a monitoring program in place. As the CO2 is injected into the formation and migrates through, this is from the perspective of a saline aquifer, having monitoring wells, which can take samples using an apparatus called a U-tube, with a U as in just a U-tube, not the
shape.
Channel. Yeah, the shape, yeah.
Not what everybody's watching from right now.
No, exactly. So that allows a monitoring of carbon dioxide concentrations, and if you've got CO2 being injected from different sources, maybe from a cement factory, where the CO2 comes from heated rock, you're going to have a different isotopic signature of your carbon than you would from, say, burning natural gas or oil. We can talk about, that's probably a little bit of an aside. Essentially, everyone's heard about carbon-14 dating, and that's you see it on the History Channel of how we figure out how artifacts from archaeology are dated. Carbon-14 is an unstable isotope of carbon. There are two stable isotopes. One is carbon-12, which is the most common. The other one is 13. And the ratio of those is typically characteristic of the chemistry of whatever it is you're looking at. And carbonate rocks limestone that we heat up to create some of the quicklime, which is a key component of cement, they have a very different C13 and C12 ratio from petroleum, which comes from plankton and algae that used to live on in the sea, that got buried in the sediments millions and millions of years ago. And as a result, the CO2 that comes from burning fossil fuels has a different isotopic signature from the CO2 that comes from creating cement. Why does that make a difference? Well, if you've got a series of injectors into a given formation, or you have a source of CO2 that could be natural in place, being able to tell if there is a leak, being able to tell, wait a second, this is actually happening naturally, or this is coming from that well or that injector. That allows the operator to say, wait a second, we need to ease off on the injection rate, we need to put down a pressure relief well, we need to turn that one off. It allows the operator to assess how the plume is propagating through the formation. And that's key to having a safe operation, because you don't want to have leaks through the overlying formations or through the casing. And so having a monitoring program in place is absolutely critical. So thanks for bringing that up, Scott. I appreciate it.
We do have to say here, Scott said, I'm blushing from the compliment. Also, the fact that it was actually Tavik's comment, actually. So it says LinkedIn user, and I can't always scroll through. So both of you guys, thank you both so much for watching. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop asking my questions because I've still got like 100 more, and I told everybody beforehand about this. So I'm going to start picking some of the stuff that's come in here. So we've got Adam. Is there a process of verifying the integrity of storage wells that have been P&A'd, i.e. looking for CO2 leaks? Commented a little bit on there just now, but just wanted to be able to let put the questions up there that we have been getting in.
I would say certainly taking, if they are leaking, taking a sample of the CO2 and having a look at it. If there are other wells that are from that same formation that are still under production or have been produced from before, having a look at what fluids were in place or are currently still in the formation is worthwhile. Similar to what we said before, talking about the planning for these things. There are always more options if these discussions are had before the scenario happens. Again, there is no one size fits all, and so in the question you ask about a well that's already been P&A'd, we need to look at the specifics. Are there active sources of CO2 naturally occurring in that area that could be also responsible? How deep is the well? How many different zones have been completed? Is it a long lateral? Are there potential different fault zones that the well goes from one to the next? There are a number of different uncertainties that immediately come to mind that would need to be addressed. So short answer is yes, it is possible, but it would need to be tailored again to the scenario.
All right, so another one here from Bob Godbolt, good friend. Will plasma pulse technology become the most dominant EOR technology, or is it just one tool in the armory?
I would say it's probably just one tool in the armory. I will confess the world of EOR is so broad that there are areas of specialty. That one is relatively far outside my confidence zone. So, but given that EOR has been around now since, well, 35 years or more, and CO2 injection, at least since the first project back in 72 in Texas, there are so many different scenarios and geological types as well as, or geologies rather, and completions that I would be reluctant to say that any one technique is going to be the answer to everything.
So we did have I was trying to figure out who this question came from, and I can't find it, but please advise on saline aquifers versus depleted wells. I believe this was in regards to CO2. I think that's about the time we started that when this question came up. Sorry, guys, I kept stealing the show.
That's fine. Yeah. So these are both similar in regard to that there is no production well, in that the CO2 which is being injected into the formation with the intent of then just leaving it there with no additional activity. It's not displacing fluids out for production. So similarities are that you're going to see overall an increase in pressure because you're putting more fluid into the existing volume that's there. The biggest differences, I would say, is in saline aquifers, you're dealing with your carbon dioxide stream and any contaminants that might be in there, and your saline brine. Those are your two components. With depleted reservoirs, you're dealing with your injection stream, whatever the formation water is. So that's analogous to that is your formation brine. But you also have the petroleum that's there, the residual petroleum from which is why this is depleted. Any formation which has petroleum in originally was just water wet and had just the formation brine, and then through the course of migration and accumulation, the petroleum has accumulated and displaced some of that formation water, and so it doesn't displace all of it. And so the biggest difference with depleted reservoirs is going to be that you're looking with 3 fluids versus 2 with saline aquifers.
All right, and then we've got here with Jose, who's got a question on CCUS, CCS. A lot of rumors are going going on to apply carbon tax in the U.S. industry and some consequences on the field economic and reserves. What is your opinion?
So I don't know what rumors particularly you're referring to. I know that there have the Q45 tax credits have been around since 2018 and have led to more projects that would otherwise not have been initiated. I know there are a lot of projects which have been started, at least under discussion, in the last couple of years, and certainly at Stratum, we have had a steady increase in inquiries about carbon capture, utilization, sequestration from all over the world, including the United States, and that has seen a steady increase in the last year. It's not only has it been steadily increasing, the rate has been increasing as well, and they've been coming in thicker and faster. So, like I said, I don't know what the rumor is that you heard. Given the amount of funding which has happened around the world and the tax credits in the United States, unless either of those change, and I can't see any of those changing anytime soon, I think this is just going to become more and more common.
So this was kind of a comment / question. Wouldn't the most cost-effective way to be to install a CO2 sequestration unit on the back end of a gas or coal fired power station and inject the recovered CO2 into a nearby depleted well? Got to be a lot of suitable candidates in Texas, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. That came from Scott.
The answer is yes. Yes, absolutely. That is the most efficient way, and that is those have been the majority of the projects that have been considered in the past for for capture of production. In the early days of CO2 injection, there weren't technologies that could capture the CO2 from the flue gas of power stations or cement factories or smelting facilities. And so the CO2 in those early projects needed to be found from somewhere. So, and where would you find them? There are accumulations of CO2 underground. And so it was an unfortunate fact that the early days of CO2 injection back in the 70s, it required us to go and find CO2 that was already sequestered, take it out of the ground, and then inject it into petroleum reservoirs. Now, of course, we have the technology to capture the flue gas or the CO2 in the flue gas from power stations and from cement factories and smelting facilities and inject into the ground. So you're absolutely right. The most common mechanisms for capture are using ammonia or amine-based solutions. And essentially we have a flow of the flue gas, bubbles through a solution which preferentially separates out the CO2. The rest of the flue gas bubbles up and goes into the atmosphere, absent of the CO2. That solution, which is now
and flue gas just being like what comes out of the exhaust of a car or a generator.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
exactly. That solvent now is enriched in CO2. It moves to a separate vessel, which is then heated, and the CO2 is liberated, and then the depleted solvent will then go back, and so that cycles round and round. And then the CO2, which has been liberated, then gets pressured up, and then is injected underground. And in fact, one of the projects that is currently underway in the North Sea, the Northern Lights program, has two potential sources of CO2. One is from a natural gas power station, the other is from a cement factory, and that's exactly the approach for that.
All right, so we got one last question, unless you guys start firing off some more. Can you shed some more light on what you were seeing in regarding to hydrogen with the respect to CCUS and CO2?
So hydrogen,
Fernando Hernandez. So Fernando, thank you for your question.
Great, thank you. Good question. A lot of these technologies are applicable. Again, we're injecting gases that have been pressurized up into porous rock in the subsurface. Again, the phase behavior, the relative viscosities, all of the uncertainties that we've talked about before, the distribution of the porosity and so on, those are all common regardless of what's actually being injected. And what I find particularly exciting is that so much of what we have been working on, over the last 20 odd years, is directly applicable to these new targets. It's tried and tested technology, but aimed at new targets, new applications. Hydrogen is a little bit less mature. I say it's a little bit less. It's substantially less mature. Hydrogen is obviously much smaller and lighter, and it's more mobile. And there are different types of target destinations that are being considered. One of the more common references that I've heard is injecting into salt caverns, where salt has been removed through solution mining, and then typically the way those are left is that we have a saturated brine within a dome or a cavity which has been evacuated from dissolution. As the water is injected, dissolves the salt, and comes back out. Using those as destinations for hydrogen, because the permeability of halite is much, it's tiny, it's crystalline, and so it's sufficient to trap the hydrogen. One of the other advantages is that fractures which occur in salt domes or in halite, which is essentially it's sodium chloride, they anneal once they're self-healing, and so obviously the Earth moves over time, and fractures occur all the time in rocks, but they heal themselves. And why is that important? Well, hydrogen being so small, it preserves the integrity of that. So I would say from the hydrogen standpoint, I mean, the value there is that if we can come up with a mechanism of storing hydrogen, which is generated by other techniques or renewable energy sources, then where do we store the hydrogen in the meantime? That's where I see this application. And it's a direct continuation, it's a logical segue from the geoscience and the engineering and pulling together the understanding of the fluids and the rocks, and then what we have put in place to use the pore spaces and the pressures and temperatures which are available to us for new applications. I see for me, I guess what it comes down to is that this is a segue from the entirely fossil fuel economy to the new applications, to a greener technology and a zero carbon future. It illustrates that it's not necessary that green technologies have to be uneconomic. It simply isn't the case. And which better industry that has expertise in engineering, understanding the subsurface, pulling those together, the infrastructure, the management of large projects like this, which better than the petroleum industry? I don't see anybody else that could even come close to addressing these challenges effectively.
It'd be interesting to see that if the price of carbon goes up so high for being able to get rid of it, that it becomes economical to actually drill wells in a particular field to be able to get rid of it. Just like you would have drilled a particular field to be able to recover hydrocarbons, that somebody does the reservoir engineering and goes, here's a nice big blank space. And then we start the exact same process. You have landman going out to somebody and says, hey, we want to put a storage facility, minimum 3,000 feet below your house and your ranch. This is how much we're going to give you, and then we're just going to keep pumping in there until we can't pump any more in. Then we're going to close it off, and then you'll get some kind of residual or something. Like, I could obviously that's further down the road, but I mean, the oil and gas industry has the intellect, the knowledge, and the capability to be able to put something like that together.
And there will be efficiencies as we get better at the new applications. Yeah, absolutely.
Once again, the oil and gas industry saves the day. All right, Matt, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you, everybody here, for watching. Matt, I'll let you have it. Any last words that you'd like to be able to share with everybody out there?
Well, there's going to be, I believe, a link set up to our website. If you have any questions about whether EOR or potentially CCUS is something which could benefit the project that you're working on, by all means, give me a call. And we have a a broad and multidisciplinary team of subject matter experts would be only too happy to discuss with you what your challenges would be. And if there are any questions, even just generally, by all means, drop me a line. I'd be more than happy to share my knowledge. And yeah, I suppose that's probably it. Thanks very much, Dave. I really appreciate your time and the opportunity to talk to everyone, and thanks for him as well. So I think that's probably it.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. I know I had probably a ton of elementary style questions, but this was extremely fascinating for me right from the start. Like I said, you know, it's something I know very little about, and I'm always interested in learning more about our industry. I hope that everybody that was watching also got to learn a little bit here today. This is great stuff. And Jennifer Cannon, thank you so much. She's the person over there at Stratum. I know her from her previous days at another company, but thank you so much, Jennifer, for helping to be able to set this up. You are absolutely amazing, and you deserve a big raise. So for everybody out there that's watching, be sure tune in next week. So here's the lineup. Next week, we've got Graham Mitchell-Wilmot. He's coming on to be able to talk about performance drilling. This is going to be his first public appearance since becoming an entrepreneur about a week ago, right? So this will be his first. You do not want to miss this. This is, if you're in the MWD directional drilling business or in the drilling business in general, it's going to be a very fascinating show. After that, we've got the week after that. Then we've got coming on David Ramsden Wood, who's actually blocked from LinkedIn, but he's coming on to my show live. So we're really going to be kind of toting the line there, see if I get blocked. And if I don't, then following that, the next month we're going to have Dr. Robello to be able to come on and talk about mud motors. Following that will be John Clegg. And then following that would be Chad Hannock to talk about John Clegg's will be talking about innovation during a downturn, and then Chad Hannock will be talking about survey accuracy. So thank you guys also for being here. We've got Nicole Hill still watching. Thank you so much, Nicole, for being here.
Thanks, Nicole.
There's a LinkedIn user that says thank you, Matt, and thank you, David. Richie says, interesting. Thanks a lot. Go Team Stratum. Yes, everybody over there at Stratum, thank you guys so much. We got a lot of people watching. So with that, thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate it. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, do all of those things. Please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm just trying to get over 1,000. Once we get over that, we'll be good to go. All right. As always, for everybody out there that's watching, I'm going to get this set up before I screw it up again. Hold on. There we go. All right, guys. As always, know your industry.